Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never practice nunchucks in a crowded room. Never eat chole before a road trip. Always take your shirt off before you iron it. Don't take a call near a swimming pool. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Well over a week since the Pakistan election results, we still can't say who won or lost. Nor can we say who's going to form the new government. The winners, the losers, or a combination of the winner and some losers, or all of the losers together. That last is actually the likeliest. As this tamasha plays out in Pakistan, it gives us a breather to raise a more substantive question. Has democracy won or lost in this election in that country? Generally, it's been accepted that each election has strengthened the democratic impulse in Pakistan, barring, of course, the odd partyless election. In fact, there were a few in the mix, but they were deemed king's parties. This is what happened under General Musharraf. He had some parties, but these were parties that he put up, not conventional parties. In fact, leaders of all conventional parties were in exile. That is Nawaz Sharif, Benazir Bhutto, the MQM leader, they were all in exile. Altaf Hussain, he had floated some parties or sponsored some parties loyal to him, which were then called king's parties. This was under General Musharraf in 2002. Barring something like that, all elections have not ushered in a perfect democracy, but moved Pakistan towards democracy. There is a Pakistani innovation, the kind of election that Musharraf held, for example. Zia had held something like that earlier, and I will come to that. This is a Pakistani innovation in which dictators stage a facade of elections to give themselves legitimacy and also bestow upon themselves the right to claim, but I am no dictator. See, in my referendum, I just got 98.5% votes. That reference, in fact, if you follow Pakistan, you must have guessed already, but if you haven't, that reference was to Zia in 1984 with his Islamized referendum. That was a referendum on Islamization through which he sought legitimacy for himself, and 98.5% people said that they agreed. So he got endorsement of 98.5% for himself. I'd like to meet the remaining 1.5% who did not vote in his favor. I don't know what happened to them. The next formal dictator after him, Musharraf in 1999. I say formal dictator because I have to qualify it, because the army has always been the dictator, but informally, as in leading from behind. The first formal dictator after him was General Pervez Musharraf in 1999. He refrained from calling himself Chief Martial Law Administrator or even President to begin with. He started out as Chief Executive because he was shy of calling himself the President or Chief Martial Law Administrator. In the course of time, he lost that shyness and became President, if not CMLA. A hesitation about formal dictatorship had begun to grow among the Pakistani generals. Post-Musharraf, it has evolved an entirely unique doctrine where it can wield power without holding it, absolutely not holding it. Formally, never mind who gets elected. The power stays with them. Army was no longer the conductor of an opera, but more like the puppeteer behind the scene. These hybrid governments were also unique Pakistani innovation in global politics until this latest election. This latest election changed this equation or challenged this equation. Probably it will fail to change it, but it challenged it. In fact, I would take you back to 2018. In fact, I would say that this was a very convenient arrangement. It was working fine until the Pakistani army blundered in choosing Imran Khan as their favored puppet in 2018. In fact, that's where the puppeteer went wrong. That is the reason we ask the question now, irrespective of which party comes to rule Pakistan, has democracy won or lost out in this election? I'm giving you both options here with arguments in favor of each. First, why democracy has won is easier to argue. The army and the judiciary, unfortunately, but characteristically in cahoots with it, disqualified the leading contender and his party from contesting, that's Imran and his PTI, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. They sent him and his deputies to jail and froze their symbol, the bat, the cricket bat. They also brought back their new favorite in Mohammad Nawaz Sharif, who they had rudely and dictatorially removed, jailed and exiled in 2018. Of course, the same judiciary which convicted, jailed and disqualified him from public office has now reversed everything. Since it is Pakistan, no surprise here. The surprise was delivered now by the voters who contemptuously tossed the army/establishment queues to defeat their chosen parties and prefer the independents under diverse symbols fielded by Imran from prison. It's only through social media that Imran and his people let voters know which independents were actually their proxies. This is a stunning political and moral defeat for the Pakistani army. Now we know that moral doesn't bother the generals, and political they can always fix as they are doing right now. None of this, however, changes the fact that this is the first time in the history that Pakistan's people have risen to vote against their army. They've defeated their army. This election saw also, by the way, more than 70% voting against an indifferent average of 40 to 42% in the past. All of this is a win for democracy. Imran was like a favorite son for the army who went prodigal on them much too soon. He confronted them with a new ideology, let's call it Imranism, a destructive mix of conservative Islam, ultra-nationalism, economic populism, and an insurgency against the system, also anti-Westernism. The GHQ was completely stumped now. So far, they had dealt with politicians who were rational, at least to the extent of understanding self-preservation. Imran, they were not designed to deal with, so they had to squash him. This election shows how spectacularly they have failed. If the people of Pakistan rose and thumbed their noses at the army, which they revered all of these decades, it's a victory for democracy. I'd say that irrespective of how irrational Imran is, how destructive his politics for his own nation is, and how dangerous it is for his neighbors, especially India, and also irrespective of how critical I have been on him and shall continue to be so, he is dangerous for his country, his neighbors, and anybody comes close to him in his new political avatar. The bottom line, however, is that Imran has defeated his army from a prison cell. How do we then argue on the contrary that democracy is actually the loser in this election? I told you there are two options and I will give you arguments in favor of both. So the second argument, that democracy is the loser in this election. The simple argument that the side that has won is kept out of power, but a coalition of losers will most likely be installed, is only part of the story. The larger point is that the army is still so powerful that it can toss the voters' will after losing an election. So it can actually declare victory after losing an election without fighting an election, because no matter what happens, we will always be on the winning side. Or let me put it differently, ours will always be the winning side. Usually, the army waited a couple of years or sometimes three, before pulling down an elected government. That's the reason no elected Prime Minister in Pakistan has served their full 5-year term. Now it hasn't even waited for the ink on the ballot papers to dry. It lost the election. The army lost the election in spite of manipulating the playing field, changing the rules, doing to the counting process something that is 100 times worse than the ball tampering of the Imran Khan era, and still failed to win. But you know what? For the Pakistani army, it still doesn't matter. If we go with the view that democracy won because the army got defeated by the voter, how do we reconcile that with the hard reality that the government that comes will be even more subservient to the army than any other in the past? The turn in Pakistan can be easily compared with so many Islamic nations in the Middle East in the Arab Spring, one odd before the Arab Spring, in fact Algeria. Many of these states had elections, some the first in their modern history, in fact some the first in their history ever, but each one brought to power an ideology and a political force that the system found acceptable, mostly forces of Muslim Brotherhood. These forces were deeply Islamist, populist, and anti-Western and conservative. In each case, either the military or a militarized old establishment threw these out and restored dictatorships. Think Egypt, Syria, Algeria before all of these, Tunisia as it's sliding back. Everywhere in this Islamic world, the army was seen as a force of modernity and moderation. Pakistan is seeing a replay of this. The fact is, however reprehensible this subversion of democracy is, it might still serve the interests of Pakistan and its people better than an Imran Khan populist government. The rest of the world, led by the US and even China, will be relieved if the Islamist populists represented by Imran are kept out. And certainly Pakistan's neighbors will be relieved. India will be the happiest with a government fronted by the Sharifs and backstopped by the army. At least it will be a rational one and not come wrapped in a suicide vest like Imran Khan's. Which leaves us with a third question. Besides debating whether democracy won or lost in Pakistan, is a country ready for democracy just because it can hold elections when its institutions haven't yet matured and acquired the stature to protect it? Not if all they can do is play their army subaltern and dutifully follow its orders like Pakistani Judiciary and Election Commission. A real democracy is founded on institutions nurtured over long, patient and often painful decades. Until then, whether democracy won or lost in an election will remain an academic question at best.